The call came at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I was staring at my phone, wondering if I should answer. Henrik Olsen, thick Norwegian accent, very polite. Mr. Brooks, we have discovered a significant problem with Brazos Energy's compliance status. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I took a sip of coffee and watched the sunrise over Dallas's freight yards. 5 months earlier, I'd been their senior compliance engineer. Now I was about to find out they'd made a $425 million mistake, and I had front row seats. My name is Nathan Brooks, 54, and I've been keeping oil and gas companies legally compliant for 16 years. Before that, I spent 22 years in the Air Force making sure radar systems didn't fail when pilots needed them most. Same principle, different uniform. When something breaks in military systems, people die. When compliance breaks in oil and gas, companies die. The day that started this whole mess was a Tuesday, too. Austin Patterson walked into our quarterly safety meeting and called my compliance team legacy overhead with outdated processes. I knew right then Brazos Energy was heading for a cliff. Here's the thing about guys like Austin. They think confidence can substitute for competence. He had that entitled MBA energy you see everywhere these days. Designer suit, expensive watch, and the kind of arrogance that comes from never actually failing at anything that mattered. CEO's son, newly appointed chief operating officer, fresh off a Wall Street flameout that daddy had quietly swept under the rug. See, Austin had tried playing big shot at some investment firm in New York. Lasted 18 months before they mutually agreed he should pursue other opportunities. Word gets around in business circles. Apparently, he'd promised a pension fund returns on energy derivatives he didn't understand, lost them $8 million, and blamed it on market volatility. Classic case of talking big without understanding the fundamentals. But Charlie Patterson had connections, made some calls, and suddenly Austin was back in Dallas with a corner office and a new title. He didn't shake hands when we were introduced. He gave me a nod and said things like operational efficiency and AI-powered compliance monitoring while checking his phone like he'd invented productivity. Nobody asked him to present that day. Nobody stopped him either. He clicked through a PowerPoint titled Modernizing Legacy Functions, Phase 1. The slides were slick, lots of charts showing cost savings and efficiency gains. Phase 1, it turned out, was gutting my department. I'd been Brazos Energy's named SOC2 compliance officer for 12 years. That's 12 years of building safety protocols from scratch, watching regulatory changes sweep through oil and gas like hurricanes, documenting every nightmare scenario the EPA, OSHA, and API could throw at us. I had 4 external audits under my belt with 0 violations. My filing system was organized like an Air Force inventory system. Everything labeled, dated, cross-referenced. Austin didn't even know what SOC2 meant. I watched him Google it during the meeting, his fingers fumbling on his phone while he kept talking about streamlined processes. That morning, he stood there grinning with his daddy's company credit card, called compliance an outdated support function, and suggested we automate oversight using digital solutions. My department was redundant, he said, overstaffed. My $89,000 salary plus $14,000 in benefits eliminated. That's $103,000 in annual savings, he bragged. Almost a full marketing budget upgrade. Someone actually clapped. I didn't. I just capped my pen and asked, "Are we done here?" Austin left with his spreadsheet and a satisfied little smirk. I went back to my office and opened a fresh binder. It wasn't anger, wasn't even surprise, really. It was protocol, military habit. When someone's about to make a catastrophic mistake, you document everything and prepare for damage control. Thing is, I started backing up files. Every access credential, every compliance designation, every legal document where my name appeared as the responsible authority. Most people at Brazos didn't realize our entire regulatory framework still required my formal signature. Every quarterly filing, every safety certification, every audit response had Nathan Brooks listed as primary contact. No replacement had been designated. Nobody could replace me without board approval and formal reassignment paperwork filed within 21 calendar days. But Austin didn't know that. His daddy Charlie, the CEO, probably didn't either. Charlie was old-school oil and gas, built the company from nothing, but he'd started letting Austin handle the modernization initiatives. Let the boy prove himself, I'd heard him tell the board. At first, I thought someone would pump the brakes. Maybe HR would hesitate. Maybe Charlie, who once called me the guy who keeps us out of federal prison, might speak up. But nothing. HR sent the reclassification paperwork 4 days later. My new title, Senior Administrative Coordinator. My security clearance was downgraded. My invitations to leadership meetings disappeared overnight. I nodded. No complaints. Even congratulated Austin when he bragged about hitting his first efficiency target. He actually gave me a thumbs up and called me Nate. So I printed the original SOC2 designation letter, the one signed by the board in 2018, and emailed it to my personal account with a timestamp. Then I printed 2 copies. One went into my home filing cabinet, the other into a binder labeled Regulatory Continuity, Archive Only, and I quietly placed it in the legal department's storage room. 4th shelf, left side. Didn't tell anyone. See, people think revenge needs to be loud, dramatic exits and angry speeches about being unappreciated. But nobody appreciates a landmine either until someone steps on it. The real beauty was in section 12.3 of our business continuity plan, a clause I'd added 3 years ago after watching a competitor get hammered with $4.8 million in fines for improper compliance handoffs. It stated that any change to the named compliance officer must be formally reassigned by board resolution within 21 calendar days, or the designation becomes legally invalid retroactive to the vacancy date. Oil and gas compliance fines start at $18,000 per day for minor violations. After 90 days of continued violation, they escalate to $38,000 per day. The math gets ugly fast. Austin had no idea. Legal hadn't checked. Charlie just signed off on the efficiency report without reading the details, trusting his son to handle the operational improvements that would position them for the big acquisition talks he'd been having with Bergen Industrial Group. Meanwhile, 6 weeks after the streamlining, I turned in my resignation. Clean and simple. Effective 14 days from today, I'll be stepping down from my position at Brazos Energy Systems. That's it. No drama, no exit interview demands, no company-wide email about being undervalued. They processed it like routine paperwork, disabled my access by end of day. The IT ticket was so rushed, they misspelled my name and forgot to update the compliance registry. Austin probably celebrated with an expensive lunch, thinking he'd successfully eliminated another legacy cost center. My daughter Sarah called that night to check on me. She's a junior at UT Austin studying law. Smart kid, smarter than her old man in most ways, but she inherited my attention to detail and my stubborn streak. Dad, you sure about this? What about my tuition? Spring semester's coming up. Trust me, sweetheart, this is going to work out. Your old man didn't spend 22 years in the Air Force without learning how to plan for contingencies. Sounds like you've got something up your sleeve, just following proper procedures. Sometimes that's all it takes. Thing is, Sarah had been giving me grief about being too rigid too. Called me old school more than once, said I needed to adapt to how business works now. Dad, you can't just expect companies to value experience anymore. It's all about innovation and disruption. I didn't argue with her. Kids her age think experience is just another word for being stuck in the past. She'd figure it out eventually. That weekend, I updated my profile on the Federal Compliance Registry, setting my certification to active, executive designation relinquished, no replacement filed, effective day 28. Then I registered as an independent consultant specializing in crisis compliance recovery. 24 hours later, my phone started ringing. By Monday, I had 5 serious inquiries. 3 from law firms representing companies in regulatory trouble, 1 from a boutique consulting group, and 1 from a Norwegian energy conglomerate that specialized in acquiring American mid-market manufacturers. That last one made me smile. Across town at Brazos Energy, everything hummed along without missing a beat. No exit procedures, no knowledge transfer, no replacement training. Austin was already planning phase 2 of his optimization strategy, talking about leveraging AI solutions for predictive compliance modeling. Charlie started talking about the company's new agility mindset in industry interviews. "We're not your grandfather's oil company," he told the Dallas Business Journal. "We're positioning ourselves for the future." Nobody noticed the compliance clock ticking toward day 22. I set up shop in a small office above Tommy's BBQ on Industrial Boulevard. 2 desks, a coffee maker that worked half the time, and a view of the freight yards. Rent was $2,200 a month. My first consulting contract paid 350 tons per hour. The math worked better than my old salary. Every morning I'd walk downstairs and get coffee from Tommy, old Marine who'd run the place for 23 years. We'd talk about the cowboys, the weather, sometimes about business. He knew I'd left Brazos but didn't pry. Military guys understand when someone doesn't want to talk about work. "How's the consulting business?" Tommy asked one morning, pouring me a fresh cup. "Can't complain. Turns out there's a lot of companies out there that don't know what they don't know. Always is. My dad used to say, Bichani, the most dangerous thing in business is a man who thinks he's smarter than his own rules." Tommy had that right. Problem with people like Austin is they think rules are suggestions. In the Air Force, we had a saying, procedures are written in blood. Every regulation, every safety protocol exists because someone somewhere learned the hard way what happens when you don't follow them. But here's what I knew that Austin didn't. Bergen Industrial Group had been circling Brazos Energy for 6 months, and they were notorious for their thorough due diligence. Norwegian companies don't mess around when it comes to regulatory compliance. They'd learned the hard way that American acquisition targets sometimes had surprises buried in their paperwork. Day 43 of Brazos Energy's compliance violation. I got a call from an oil services company in Louisiana. Their compliance officer had quit without notice, and they were facing a regulatory audit in 5 weeks. Panic mode. I quoted them $375 per hour plus expenses for a 4-week emergency engagement. They said yes before I finished the sentence. "Mr. Brooks, we're in deep trouble here," their plant manager told me on the phone. "Our guy left everything a mess. Files scattered. Certifications expired. Nobody knows what we're supposed to file or when." "Sir, that's exactly the kind of situation I specialize in. I can have your documentation organized and audit ready in 3 weeks. You sure about that?" 22 years keeping radar systems from failing, sir. I'm sure. Day 67. I was on a plane to Oklahoma helping a refinery navigate an EPA investigation. Their previous compliance team had missed a filing deadline. The potential fines were in the millions. My job was to reconstruct their documentation trail and prove good faith compliance efforts. Military precision and attention to detail. Same skills, different battlefield. Sarah called while I was in Tulsa. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said about procedures and planning ahead." "What about it?" "Well, I was looking at some of the compliance law programs here at UT. The professors are saying it's a growing field. Good job security." I smiled. Kid was starting to get it. "Your old man might have mentioned that once or twice." "Yeah, you did. I'm thinking about adding a minor in environmental compliance law. What do you think?" "I think that's smart planning, sweetheart. Always good to have skills that companies actually need. Speaking of which, heard anything from your old job lately?" "Nothing worth talking about." Day 89, the escalating fine structure kicked in for Brazos Energy. Not that anyone there knew it yet. Oil and gas compliance violations become exponentially more expensive after 90 days. The daily penalty jumped from $18,000 to $38,000. Still invisible, still accumulating, still retroactive today. 22. I was back in Dallas when Tommy mentioned he'd heard some rumors. Word is Brazos Energy's got some kind of deal cooking. Big Norwegian company sniffing around. Yeah, Charlie Patterson was in here last week bragging about it. Said they were going to be millionaires. I sipped my coffee and watched a freight train make its way across the rail yard. Funny how things work out. Day 95. Sarah called with news. She'd been accepted into UT's Accelerated Compliance Law program. New field, growing demand, excellent job prospects. Guess who inspired me to look into it? Your old man's rubbing off on you. More like I realized there's job security in keeping people out of trouble. Plus, the starting salaries are really good. Smart thinking. Companies are always going to need people who know how to follow the rules. Dad, can I ask you something? Shoot. You really think Brazos Energy is going to be okay without you? I looked out my window at the Dallas skyline, thinking about Section 12.3 and the compliance clock that nobody over there was watching. Sweetheart, some lessons you can't teach. Some folks got to learn the hard way. Day 120. Brazos Energy announced the deal of the century. Press release went out at 9:00 a.m. Brazos Energy Systems to be acquired by Bergen Industrial Group for $425 million. The story made the Dallas Business Journal front page. Charlie was quoted extensively about Brazos Energy's innovative operational transformation under new leadership. Austin was quoted too, and you could practically hear his chest puffing up through the newsprint. He'd positioned himself as the architect of Brazos Energy's lean operational model that attracted international attention. The article mentioned his strategic elimination of redundant legacy functions as a key factor in Bergen's interest. There was even a photo of him in his corner office, arms crossed, looking like he'd just conquered Europe. I read it over my morning coffee at Tommy's. The old Marine saw me smiling at the newspaper. "Good news?" he asked. "You could say that. Sometimes patience pays off." Tommy glanced at the headline. "That your old outfit?" "Used to be. $425 million. That's serious money." "Sure is." I folded the paper and finished my coffee. Wonder if they dotted all their I's and crossed all their T's. Tommy gave me a look. Military guys know that tone. Sounds like maybe they didn't. Well, that would be their problem, wouldn't it? Day 135, the due diligence team from Bergen Industrial Group arrived in Dallas. Professional, thorough, and led by Dr. Astrid Weber, who spoke 4 languages and had the kind of attention to detail that made German engineering legendary. Her team included Henrik Olsen, a compliance specialist who'd spent 18 years auditing American acquisitions for European companies. Meanwhile, back at Brazos Energy, Austin was in full celebration mode. He'd already started talking about his post-acquisition role, dropping hints about expanding into international markets and leveraging Bergen's European connections. "This is just the beginning," he told anyone who'd listen. "We're going to show them how American innovation really works." Charlie was proud as punch, telling reporters how his son had transformed the company culture. Austin brought a fresh perspective we desperately needed. Sometimes you need young blood to shake things up. Sarah called that evening, excited about the news. "Dad, did you see your old company's getting bought out? $425 million. "Yeah, I saw. That's crazy money. Think they'll keep all the employees?" "Hard to say, sweetheart. These international buyouts, sometimes they clean house, sometimes they don't. Kinda weird timing though, right? I mean, they just restructured everything, got rid of you and your team, and now suddenly they're worth $500 million. Smart kid." Funny how that works out. You don't sound surprised. I learned a long time ago that in business, timing is everything. Sometimes companies get lucky, sometimes they don't. The Bergen team spent their first week reviewing financial records, operational metrics, and safety protocols. Everything looked clean. Austin had prepared beautiful presentations about streamlined operations and reduced overhead. The numbers were impressive. The timeline was aggressive. Charlie had already started talking about integration plans. Bergen executives were optimistic. This looked like exactly the kind of lean, efficient American manufacturer they wanted in their portfolio. Brazos Energy's management team was confident. Legal had reviewed everything twice. The deal was on track for closing in 2 weeks. Austin was already planning his victory celebration, talking about taking the whole family to Europe to tour Bergen's facilities. "We'll show them what Texas hospitality looks like," he bragged. But I knew something they didn't. Henrik Olsen wasn't just any compliance specialist. Guy had a reputation in the industry. He'd killed 3 major acquisitions in the past 5 years, saving Bergen from deals that looked good on paper but had regulatory time bombs buried in the fine print. Word was he could spot a compliance gap from 50 feet away. Day 140, Tommy mentioned he'd seen some foreign-looking folks in suits around town. "Norwegians," I told him. "Due diligence team. They're buying Brazos Energy." "Trying to." "You think it'll go through?" I shrugged. "Depends on what they find when they start digging." Day 145. Sarah called again. She'd been following the story in the local business press. "Dad, I've been reading about this Bergen Industrial deal. The professors here are saying it's a big deal for Dallas. Lot of jobs at stake. That's usually how these things work. You ever deal with international compliance stuff when you were there?" "Some." "European companies are pretty thorough. They don't like surprises." Day 147, Henrik Olsen was getting deep into the compliance review. Bergen's legal team had given him a checklist of regulatory requirements that needed verification. Standard stuff, environmental permits, safety certifications, federal compliance designations, the kind of paperwork that most American companies kept in good order. Most companies. Day 148. Henrik was in Brazos Energy's legal archive room cross-referencing regulatory filings with personnel records. Routine due diligence, nothing unusual. He wasn't looking for problems, just verifying that all certifications were current and properly maintained. That's when he found my binder, fourth shelf left side, exactly where I'd left it 5 months earlier. Regulatory continuity, archive only. Henrik spent 2 hours going through every document. Then he cross-referenced the dates with Brazos Energy's current compliance registry. Then he pulled out his calculator and started running numbers that would change everything. The math was simple and brutal. Day 22 through day 148 equals 126 days of compliance violation. First 90 days at $18,000 per day equals $1.62 million. Remaining 36 days at $38,000 per day equals $1,368 million. Total exposure, $2.988 million, and climbing at $38,000 per day until resolved. Henrik called Dr. Weber immediately. Day 149, Thursday morning, 9:15 a.m. Henrik Olson walked into the Brazos Energy boardroom carrying a folder that would destroy everything Austin had built. "Who is Nathan Brooks?" Henrik asked, setting the folder on the conference table. Austin looked confused. "He used to work here. We restructured his position last year as part of our operational optimization. But he is still listed as your named SOC2 compliance officer," Henrik said, opening the folder. "According to your federal registry, he remains the designated authority for all regulatory filings." Charlie leaned forward, his face already showing concern. "That's impossible. We handled his transition months ago." Henrik shook his head. "You have been operating without valid compliance authority for exactly 126 days. Your current exposure is $2.988 million, increasing by $38,000 daily." The room went dead quiet. Austin looked like someone had just told him his trust fund had evaporated. Dr. Weber closed her laptop slowly. "This is a material breach of due diligence representations. We are terminating acquisition proceedings immediately." That afternoon, Henrik called me directly. I gave him the timeline, confirmed no formal replacement had been designated. When he asked about the compliance gap, I mentioned the binder. "We found it," Henrik said. "Very thorough documentation." "Yes, sir." Seemed like prudent risk management. "Indeed. Are you currently available for consulting engagement? Depends on the scope and timeline. What did you have in mind?" Day 150. The Bergen team was packed and gone by noon. Their press release went out Monday morning. Bergen Industrial withdraws from Brazos Energy acquisition due to unresolved regulatory compliance issues. Brazos Energy's stock opened down 19% and kept falling. By market close, it had dropped 34% in a single day. Austin tried damage control, calling it a minor procedural oversight in interviews. But word gets around fast in the industry. By Wednesday, 2 other potential buyers had backed out. The company that Austin claimed was positioned for the future was suddenly toxic. Day 156. Charlie Patterson called an emergency board meeting. I heard about it from Tommy, whose cousin worked in the building next door. "Lot of shouting coming from that boardroom," he told me over coffee. The board gave Austin 24 hours to submit his resignation. He tried to blame legal, tried to blame HR, tried to blame everyone except himself. But when you promise shareholders a $425 million payday and deliver a $3 million regulatory fine instead, somebody's got to take the fall. His resignation letter was 2 sentences long. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my position as Chief Operating Officer of Brazos Energy Systems. I wish the company continued success in its future endeavors. Charlie announced his early retirement that same day, day 160. Dr. Weber called me back. "Mr. Brooks, Bergen Industrial is interested in retaining your services for a comprehensive compliance review of our North American operations. 18-month contract, $350 per hour, full autonomy over methodology and timeline." I looked around my little office above Tommy's. Coffee maker that worked half the time, view of the freight yards, and a stack of consulting contracts that had tripled my old salary. "Yes, ma'am, I'm available." Sarah called that weekend, excited about starting her compliance law program. She'd been following the Brazos Energy story in the business news. "Dad, they're using this as a case study in my business law class. Professor says it's a perfect example of how cutting corners on compliance can destroy shareholder value. What's your take on it?" That someone at Brazos Energy knew exactly what they were doing when they wrote those procedures and someone else ignored them because they thought they knew better. You know what's funny? I used to think you were too rigid about following rules. Now I'm thinking maybe that's not such a bad thing. Smart thinking, sweetheart. Rules exist for a reason. Dad, I have to ask, did you know this would happen? I thought about that for a moment. I knew what the consequences were supposed to be if proper procedures weren't followed. Whether they'd actually follow through was up to them. You're something else, you know that? Just an old Air Force guy who knows how to read the manual. Tommy poured me a fresh cup of coffee Monday morning. Heard about your old company. Rough break. Some folks got to learn the hard way. Word gets around in this industry. Company that fires their compliance officer to save money. Other companies remember that. Your daughter's right about job security. There's always demand for people who can keep companies out of federal prison. Business is good, really good. The Brazos Energy building sits mostly empty now, for lease signs in the windows. Austin's LinkedIn shows he's exploring new opportunities in emerging markets. Charlie's retirement in Scottsdale is probably comfortable, but his reputation in Dallas manufacturing circles is finished. Me? I'm the guy companies call when they want to make sure their compliance officer is irreplaceable. Because experience beats innovation every single time. Especially when the stakes are measured in hundreds of millions and someone's counting on you to know where all the exits are located. Just took them $425 million to figure that out.